what people here thought of what happened in Dallas, that horrible event down there during the demonstration. If you got the chance to read this, what did you think of it?
Well, generally speaking, it brought back memories of the shooting, sniper shooting of a St. Paul police officer back in the late 60s. And if you are stereotyped as the pigs or the cops,
Yeah.
by some people, you know that to some people, you are the enemy.
Yeah, you're hardly even human.
And that puts you on edge. So I can totally understand that putting any local officer on edge. It saddens me. You know, I don't like to be quote unquote anti-veteran. But the reality is the guy that did the shooting in Dallas with those officers was a very finely trained, served well veteran. And he lost it, and he didn't lose it of his own free will. We sent him to Iraq and Afghanistan. We trained him to kill because we wanted killers to go over there and secure their oil for us. And
you can't
I feel sorry for him.
You can't just undo that now that they've come home. And it not only was the Dallas shooter a former Marine, a veteran, so was the shooter in Baton Rouge. Was also had been Marine, and I think that that's telling. I think that when we send young men and women into basic training and we just sort of do everything possible to undo their basic stuff.
Like Teresa, Colleen Rowley rather, and Todd Pierce have stated before on our shows, it isn't just the militarization of the police and the veterans' preference of police officers. We have veterans police preference in the FBI, CIA, Homeland Security, and all the private security organizations are giving preference to veterans who are coming home from our wars, militarized, warriorized, and they're being trained by the Israeli police and military.
Yes, I remember you telling me that.
And I have read that almost every, if not every, police person in the United States now is in some way getting warriorized because of the Israeli military training that goes on for cops here.
It would be interesting to hear exactly what that training entails. To know.
It would be interesting to know if that's a fact or if it's just something that you've read. I've read it too, and I don't think so, but I don't have the absolute proof that you're 100% wrong. There's often a lot of truth to things, but I think it's a pretty gross exaggeration. I don't know if this changing the subject or getting back to the militarization and the shooters in those cases, but Rita just told me about a fellow that was staying at a veteran's home in Sauk Center who killed himself. And there are many, many, many more suicides by our veterans where they are killing themselves than instances where they are killing other people or police officers, or if they are veteran police officers, killing citizens unjustifiably or whatever. I mean, we're talking thousands of veterans killing themselves, and not at a rate comparable to the Second World War, not at a rate comparable to Korea or Vietnam, but at an astronomical rate that hasn't stopped, even though our major combat operations have stopped. Some of these kids, now they're not kids anymore, but they've been to Iraq and Afghanistan and lived in terrorized fear off and on for years at a time, and then gotten back in part so that they could get veterans benefits, which I don't think anybody should want to take away from them.
No, I don't think so.
It needs to be seriously considered in the hiring of certain people, certainly. So, but I don't think we can blame police training for what is happening. I personally think that it's a bigger issue than that.
Okay, I think you're right. But you know, there are wheels within wheels. The military and the police have some things in common that are just so obvious that you can't discount them from either side. And if, as you say, many veterans are applying for and training for police work, that's something to be very aware of. Okay.
Can we just make a couple comments about the use of force?
Please do.
Deadly force? Because when you folks contacted me about coming here, one of the things that I thought was a major concern was the Philando Castile shooting, and whether or not justice for Castile involved prosecuting that police officer that was involved for a crime. And I have some pretty strong feelings about it because it could have been me.
Yeah.
You know, based on what I know about it, the officer involved thought that he was doing a stop with a possible, not probable, but possible felony suspect in an armed robbery. He certainly knew that he was doing a stop of a black man, and there's certainly some, whatever you want to call it, racism-based or race-based awareness that there are several young black men willing to pull the trigger. They shoot each other with great abandon, and police officers know that there's a much greater likelihood they're going to get shot by a young black man than by an older white woman.
Okay.
I mean, that's obviously a pretty dichotomous view of things, but you know, when they stop me, I don't think they have the same level of fear that they would have if they stopped a 25-year-old version of me and I happen to be black.
Right.
And my level of respect and calmness, etc., my demeanor is certainly different. But based on everything that has happened and all the demonstrations and the claims that everyone wants justice for Castile, I want justice for him and I want justice for that cop. And if the cop had any premeditation at all to go up to the car and shoot a young black man, that's premeditated murder. Obviously, I don't think many people think that. I think that the question becomes, was the taking of his life justifiable? And there is law on that. The legislature has special provisions for the use of force, the use of deadly force by peace officers. And the Supreme Court and the Minnesota laws have all had basically the same philosophy that I have, and that is that we know this is going to happen. And we don't give these people guns and send them out there on the street thinking that no one's going to get killed.
Right.
We know that somebody's going to get killed. We like it to be very rare. We don't want it to happen on any kind of a race-based basis. We'd like things to be better than they are. But there is a statute called justifiable taking of life. And we don't have capital punishment in Minnesota, which makes us better than Mississippi and Georgia and Texas and all those other things. But we do have justifiable taking of life. And that's clearly a law. I don't know if it covers the Castile shooting, but neither does anyone in Black Lives Matter, neither does anyone that I know of in Dodd County or Morrison County. We don't know the facts.
Right.
Hopefully there will be video. And obviously we know from the video already that there was a firearm present. We don't know if his hand went near it. We don't know if it was taken out of whatever holding it was in. But we do know that his life was taken. The question now, and no matter what happens, he's not coming back. Was it justifiable? Did it meet the criteria of the law? And I just want to share one thing. The Supreme Court of the United States in 1989, in Graham versus Connor, case, said the use of force involving a police officer shooting should be judged from the perspective of a reasonable officer on the scene, not 20/20 hindsight. And that is why, in the case of, I can't even remember the fellow's name in Minneapolis, but in the Minneapolis case, they didn't prosecute. We're not sure that that was an unreasonable use of force. We don't know, and we're not sure now yet, and we may never know in the Castillo shooting until we get the evidence, and the evidence could be conclusive one way or the other, but in all likelihood it will not be conclusive in one way or the other. And it needs to be, according to the Supreme Court, judged from the perspective of a reasonable officer on the scene, not 20/20 hindsight.
So even if this reasonable officer on the scene was not actually on the scene, you're saying that you need to go back and reconstruct it from the point of view of what would have been a reasonable, calm, collected police officer?
No, I didn't say it. There's nothing in the court statement either that says anything about calm collected. Nobody in their right mind thinks that you're standing there with a gun in your hand and you see a firearm and you're calm and collected. You're doing your absolute best job to be, quote unquote, a professional and objective police officer. But if somebody points a gun at you, and I don't know if they ever have or not, but if they do, you might lose bladder control. I mean, it seriously is a stimulus response kind of thing where the pointing of a weapon or the presence of a weapon alarms things tremendously. And it's a serious consideration that the media doesn't seem to be focusing on. They're talking about racism and all these other things, and certainly cops are no more or less racist than school teachers or priests or anybody else. Some are, some aren't. Most are a little bit, in my opinion.
This is the culture.
Yeah, because they represent us. But that justifiable taking of life, you can't prosecute someone with a reasonable expectation of winning if the situation is such that from a reasonable officer on the scene's point of view, this was a quote-unquote good shooting. And I say that not facetiously, that's the way it's talked about.
You are just such a voice of reason in a troubled world. So you are.
Smooth talker.
I like that about you. You don't speak lightly. You think about everything that you say before you say it. And I wish I could say as much about myself. Well, I think yes.
Jamar Clark is, I think, who you're speaking of.
Jamar Clark.
And somewhere in that stack of
Yes.
articles, there's one about former chief of police Tony Boza
Right,
and his statement.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, you want to make a comment of what his comment was in there about why he didn't think that it was justifiable? Because the hand, Jamar Clark's hand was not on the officer's gun.
Well, I would just say that I have the utmost respect for Tony Boza, and it is conceivable that he saw something that I wasn't able to see in terms of the evidence. The evidence that I saw was so vague and so blurry that I couldn't tell for sure. Did the guy touch the officer's gun? Apparently he did, because I think they did it through DNA, that he had touched the officer's gun. That by itself doesn't mean that, judged by this standard of the Supreme Court, that would not have occurred. The use of force judged from the perspective of a reasonable officer at the scene. I'll just finish this. We got time? I'll tell you just
5 minutes.
a real quick story. I was involved in a chase in an unmarked car following a fellow through St. Paul city streets. He stopped the car after this chase, pulled over to the side of the road and ducked down. I had no idea if he was ducking down to get something or just to hide. And in those days, we didn't have instant radio communication. We had the tube type radios in the trunk. I radioed that I was stopped by this fellow in my location, and I knew that people would be on the way. I opened up the door, got behind the car, had my hand in my pocket of a car coat type police jacket on a .38 revolver that was my backup gun. I had a second gun. I had one in my holster, and then I had this one in my pocket. I stood by my doorway, and I said, "Stick your hands up. You're under arrest," or something to that effect. Maybe obscenity, I have no idea what I said, to be honest with you. And nothing happened. So I stood there by the door of the car, at which point his driver's door went open, and I still could not see him. He was ducked down. So I figured he's coming out with a gun. Or at least that was a realistic possibility in my mind. And my thought in retrospect, and at the time I don't remember even having time to think, but my thought in retrospect was, one of us is going here, and it ain't gonna be me. So I get my gun out of my pocket, and I'm holding it in my hand, but still behind the door. He gets out, and his hands are fully exposed down by his side, kind of. And I step out from behind the door, 15 feet away from him, and he comes running at me full blast, puts his arms around me, pins my arm with the gun like this. We have a little bit of a struggle where I end up kneeing him in the groin and turning him around and flopping him against the roof of his car, at which point the gun goes off and he gets shot. He didn't die, but I felt 100% okay with things until the detective said to me, "Let's have your gun." And then the next thing I remember from that story is being at headquarters, and the detectives and the court reporter are all there, and they're going to interview me. And one of my supervisors or sergeant came up to me and said, "You better get yourself an attorney, don't say anything." And I just wanted to share that experience that had some kind of background. The upshot of the whole thing was I went to the grand jury. The grand jury proceeding was an abomination in my opinion, but there never were any charges. And I recently tried to find out if there was any information I could get about that. And all proceedings of the grand jury are secret, and they don't know or won't tell me if it's been destroyed, if the Historical Society has it or anything else. But a friend of mine who retired as a deputy chief told me, "Don't bother, I tried, I can't get it, you're not gonna get it." So anyway, my relationship to police shootings, is that kind of a visceral one.
Yeah, I appreciate your sharing that with us. And let's end on that note.
All right, thank you.
I think that's a very good place to end. Thank you so much, Davis, for coming and joining us today. This is Can We Talk? And we'll see you next time. Thank you.